before we get into the nitty-gritty of this presentation. First and foremost, this is going to be recorded for the sakes of all your privacy and also for future reference. If you do have any questions at all during this, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box, and we're more than happy to try to answer them. And I'm going to have some colleagues on the webinar today who will be fielding these questions and assisting you. And they'll also be entering supplemental information as well. Lastly, if you're feeling bold and you want to raise your hand, we can enable your screen to be seen and you can ask a question that way. So my name is Justin Sungott Smith. I am a behavioral health therapist, and like all behavioral health therapists, I am a licensed therapist. So my role entails doing a lot of individual counseling surrounding substance use, addictive behavior, and whatever other mental health concerns are presented within that context. In addition, I do group counseling as well as a lot of education efforts. So I do presentations like this one to various students, staff, and faculty on and off campus. And I'm very honored to be here today to present this information to you. So some of this information I've actually gathered from my own research, and other pieces of this information I've actually gotten from talking to students and clients, and they are really the ones that have encouraged me to share this information with you today. And furthermore, I think they really serve as a testament to how powerful this information is. So I just want you to know that my intent today is not to tell you what to do or cast any judgment on whatever behavior you have. I just want to provide you with the facts surrounding how screens and devices are affecting you, so you can make a better informed decision about how you want to use screens. I would hope that if nothing else from this presentation, maybe it would spark a general sense of curiosity surrounding what is the nature of your relationship with your devices and screens. And while we're on the topic of curiosity, it might be a little interesting experiment to try out here. See, during this presentation, notice how many times you're tempted to look at your phone. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but for right now, just notice that tendency that you may have to be drawn towards your phone during this. The last thing I want to say here is that I know sometimes when we are presented with information surrounding mental health matters, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of possibly trying to diagnose yourself and thinking you have every disorder in the book. And I can definitely attest to this experience, given the fact that I went through clinical psychology. In my whole graduate cohort, they basically experienced this. So let's just all agree today that what you may hear, all of us do share certain aspects of the behaviors, but maybe let's be cautious in terms of not pathologizing it, and just be in agreement on that. My only intent here today is to help you build more of a relationship of balance with your screens, if that's something you're interested in. So looking at some of the learning outcomes, first and foremost, you being able to understand some of the research surrounding the biological, psychological ramifications of screen use, being able to identify the indicators that might signal that you may have more problematic use, and also being able to learn some concrete interventions that would help mitigate some of the negative consequences and allow you to get more out of your screen use. Lastly, being able to understand the connection that exists between mindfulness and how this can be used to combat addictive behavior, and specifically screen use. So I don't know if this image resonates with any of you, but it sure resonates with me. And definitely this is how I've been feeling with respect to my use of screens. Maybe more so before I started doing this research. And I think gradually over time, I've been able to find more balance. And I really hope that this presentation offers the same for you. Maybe being able to disentangle from some of these cords and help build a healthier relationship. So we are going to do a quick little poll here. So we're going to enter the questions into the chat, and we're just going to take a couple minutes here to answer them, if you'd be so kind. And then we're going to talk about them a little bit. So please take your time and just answer them to the best of your ability. And then we'll discuss that in a second. Okay, it looks like the majority of people have voted, so we're going to just end the poll, and I believe the poll results will pop up for you there. All right, so let's just take a look at these questions here. Number one, it looks like the majority of you feel like you spend a lot of time thinking about using screens or planning to use them. Number two, also it appears the majority of you would be in agreement with that. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you have answered yes to all these questions, with the exception of number 5. So I think that is very demonstrative that you are in the right place in terms of this information is very relevant to all of you. And I'm just going to share the results real quick here so you can see for yourself. But I think it's just a good indicator in terms of the temperature of the room and a good reminder of why we all are here. So now that everybody's had a chance to look at those, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and continue with the presentation here. So moving on, despite the fact that technology is growing at a rapid rate, the fundamental structure of the human brain has remained virtually more or less the same since the dawn of man. And in particular, some parts of the brain have experienced virtually no change. And these are the parts of the brain that actually govern a lot of unconscious human behavior and explain why we do the things we do. So this unconscious human behavior may be your reaction when you touch a hot stove, or someone cutting you off in traffic and that experience of road rage that may happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this unconscious human behavior plays into our topic today. So looking at the brain here, right above the spinal cord, there's this purple region of the brain, and that is known as the limbic system. And the core function of the limbic system is to avoid pain and seek pleasure at all costs. And that's kind of the hard wiring of our unconscious behavior. Now, more specifically within the limbic system, there's this area called the reward circuitry. And the reward circuitry is essentially a series of different pathways through which different chemical messengers that are known as neurotransmitters transmit different pieces of information throughout the brain. You may have heard of one of the neurotransmitters you may have heard of is serotonin. And in addition to serotonin, another one is dopamine. And dopamine is actually going to be the one that we're going to be focused on for this presentation. So like all of the neurotransmitters, dopamine naturally exists in our brain. It's just the different activities that we engage in that either inhibit or enhance the production of dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is often associated with cravings as well as coupled with feelings of pleasure. So when I'm talking about dopamine, many of you may associate dopamine with substance use. And while it is very true that a wide range of substances such as alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, and ecstasy, they all do enact the production of dopamine. But at the same time, a wide range of other activities also do this. And these activities include video games, gambling, and even eating your favorite foods. So the issue being that some of these activities actually produce such high levels of dopamine that they in turn overwhelm the more rational parts of our brain, and we can't really think about the long-term consequences of whatever behavior we're engaging in. So I think substance use is an excellent example of this, in that the large majority of substances, they do produce such high levels of dopamine that they flood our more rational parts of our brain, and we can't really think about the impact of our substance use. And we don't also, it's hard to tell when we are satiated and satisfied with the amount we're using. So on another level, the excessive use of substances also can lead to the depletion of a wide range of neurotransmitters, and these are they play a big role in terms of being able to regulate our emotions. So this can lend itself to someone experiencing depression or anxiety, and then they may turn to substances to compensate, and then it becomes a vicious cycle very quickly. So much in the same respect that these instinctual drives that I mentioned and substance use operate with regards to the production of dopamine, very similarly, screen use operates in the same way. So every time you are responding to a notification or engaging in a wide range of on-screen behaviors, it is stimulating a little surge of dopamine in your brain that is motivating you to engage in the behavior again and again. So your response to a notification is something that's actually known as a Pavlovian response. And this is basically a conditioned response to a paired stimulus. So if you were wondering, I actually did just play a notification sound. And I'm curious, how many of you thought to check your phone in that moment? Now, I want you to know that this is no accident. So this is actually an intentional effort on the part of app developers and app designers to manipulate your brain to get you to use their products more and also generate ad revenue in doing so. So one way in which this functions is something that's known as a variable schedule reward, also known as intermittent reinforcement. And this is basically the idea that when you receive a reward at a rate that is non-consistent, this leads to a big surges of dopamine occurring in your brain that motivate you to engage in the behavior again and again. So a slot machine is an excellent example of this, in that you are not winning at a consistent rate. So a student actually pointed me to some really interesting research. And the research said this: slot machines actually gross more in the US than baseball, movies, and theme parks combined. So I'll just let that settle in a little bit. And I think that is really demonstrative of how addictive these technologies are and what a moneymaker they can be. So have you ever thought of your phone is in essence a mini slot machine? In that, every time you're going on your phone, you are getting a new reward. And because that reward is not delivered at a consistent rate, it is producing these huge amounts of dopamine. So the algorithm of social media actually operates very similarly to this. In that, when you post a picture on social media, it is likely that you're getting more notifications all at once. But the way the algorithm is designed, they are interspersing these notifications. So you're getting them in bursts, which is creating more hits of dopamine. And then also it draws you back to your phone repeatedly to check, well, who else liked my photo here? So one powerful tool that you can start using in terms of being able to build more of a relationship of moderation with screens is something is known as screen time. And I'm sure many of you are very aware of this feature, and it exists in a number of phones. And basically it just tracks the amount of time you're spending on your screen and then breaks it down into different apps, as well as how many times you pick it up throughout the day. So you may start asking yourself the question, okay, so how much screen time is too much? And that's not necessarily the question. Rather, it's the way in which you're using. So if I can get you to take away anything at all from this presentation today, it's this. If you are able to start developing a conscientious awareness surrounding the impact that your screens are having on you, this is a huge step in being able to start gaining more control over your devices. So I realize there's a whole litany of research out there that exists pertaining to the effects of screen use. And I don't want to go into stuff that all of y'all already know, but I did find some really interesting tidbits. Number one, there seems to be an increasing correlation in terms of an inability to focus linked to excessive screen use. And research has actually indicated that before the iPhone and iPad came out, the average human attention span was around 12 seconds. After the iPhone and iPad came out, the average human attention span has been whittled down to 8 seconds. Which, to put into perspective, is 1 second shorter than a goldfish. Additionally, the excessive use of screens has been correlated to cognitive deterioration. And it's pretty interesting that the way to combat this is actually the face-to-face interaction. And that has been shown to slow the cognitive deterioration. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So looking at the effects of smartphone use, one pretty considerable point here that I'd like to mention is the fact that if you simply have a smartphone in your sight, you don't even have to be actively using it. That is enough to throw off one's concentration levels. And this has some pretty significant ramifications in terms of one's ability to perform academically, and then also ability to concentrate on tasks. So I feel that this point in particular has been really beneficial for me in terms of when I'm at home and I'm working and I don't need to be using my phone, I try to keep my phone out of sight. And that's been really impactful in terms of being able to be more efficient and stay on track. Another phenomenon that exists with regards to smartphones is something that's known as the phantom vibration syndrome. And this is basically the experience that many of us, I'm sure, have had. What happens is you're going along with your day and you feel your phone suddenly vibrate. And you go and check your phone and there's nothing there to suggest that your phone actually produced a vibration. And I know sometimes that this can feel like you may be losing it, but there's actually a legitimate reason behind what this happens. So what's occurring here is this is actually just a normal itch occurring in your body, but your brain is registering it as being attached to an external device. So I think this is just really, it really illustrates how our brains have adapted to technology and actually started to rewire. And it just shows how intertwined we are. So I don't know if, when I played the notification sound earlier, if any of you were aware of any notification that produced a like minute sense of anxiety or panic at all. And if you did, there's a legitimate reason why that happens. And that's because notification sounds actually release little bits of cortisol, which is a stress hormone that has a number of toxic effects on your brain and body. So that's just something to consider in terms of the long-term basis of that occurring. The last point I want to hit on really quick is something that's known as nomophobia. And this is basically a fear of not having one's phone. And I think many of us can relate to this experience in terms of this is kind of a form of separation anxiety. And it really speaks to the fact that we do have relationships with our phones. So I heard a really interesting survey the other day, and it said that given the choice of giving up your phone or your pet for a month, what would you rather do? And basically 40% people chose their phones over their pets. And amazingly enough, 44% actually chose their phones over their significant others. So if you find yourself in this camp, no judgment there. I just want to get you to think about that. So here are some good suggestions to look at in terms of if you want to moderate your screen use or your smartphone use more effectively. And these are going to be posted in the chat. Just take a quick second to look at them. All right, I know this is a lot of information to get through, so I just want all of us to take a quick breath here. And we will continue. So another on-screen behavior that I want to touch on real quickly here is social media. And I've heard from a lot of students that this has become a lot more prevalent during the pandemic. And research actually points out that that the use of social media has actually increased 50%. So we're going to take a little look about the positives and the negatives of social media here. So one of the biggest positive aspects, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, is the aspect of it providing a sense of social support for people. And this has actually been shown to decrease stress as well as decrease psychological and physical ailments. As well as another big positive impact is that it can boost people's self-esteem. And in one survey done by the Hope Labs, this was reported that 82% of people actually experience a boost in self-esteem. So I think this really shows how it can be a positive force for change in that respect. So looking at this slide, this is a slide that basically it is a survey taken from Great Britain, where users of social media were asked about the various effects that social media has on them. And you can see the different platforms outlined and then the varying effects, with the more positive effects ranging in this blue region and the more negative effects up top in the red and the dark areas. So on the positive end of the spectrum, it appears that this slide very much aligns with the past slide that I showed there in terms of the self-identity, self-expression, emotional support, etc. On the more negative end of the spectrum, it seems that sleep seems to be profoundly impacted across all social media platforms, which I think is no surprise to many of us, as well as this fear of missing out, the FOMO. And this is something I hear with a fair amount of my students, actually, especially during the pandemic. Followed by bullying, which seems to be fairly prevalent, and body image, anxiety, and depression. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the slide because it looks like we're kind of running short on time here. But I do want to hit on an important point here, and that is that there is a big difference between passive use of social media and active use. So passive use would entail engaging or not engaging cognitively or physically with social media or various technology, whereas active use is the opposite. So what you see is that with passive use, there is a lot more negative consequences, whereas active use, not so much. So you can take a look at some of these consequences here. I would say one of the biggest ones that I'd like to highlight is known as the highlight reel syndrome. And this 57% is, again, according to that same survey I mentioned, 57% of people experience this. The highlight reel syndrome is essentially, it's the idea that all of us are trying to portray the perfect, ideal version of our lives on social media, but that isn't representative of the totality of experiences, of messy, awkward, just average experiences that constitute a lot of our lives. Because face it, we're all human here. So this can lend itself to low self-esteem. Additionally, I think it's no secret that depression and anxiety do stem from excessive use of social media, and particularly depression and suicidality. When you look at that, when you look at the data, it's been shown that the rates of depression and suicidality were on a decline before social media came out. After social media came out, you have seen a gradual increase. And in terms of suicidality, this is attributed to the fact that it has become increasingly normalized by celebrities and influencers, and it has become, it seems more acceptable, and people don't really think about the full impact of that. So looking at some of these tips for managing social media, you can just take a look real quick. Again, these are going to be posted in the chat. So this brings us to our last on-screen behavior here, and that's checking the news. And I think for myself, I can take full ownership that this activity may have spiraled a little bit out of control during the pandemic for myself. And I feel that this research has been really beneficial in terms of being able to help me mitigate this more effectively. So I think it is common knowledge that the news lends itself to symptoms of depression and anxiety, and many of us are aware of this. But despite that fact, 1 in 10 of us are still checking constantly. And actually 20% of us are watching social media constantly to get our source of news. So the issue being is that 90% of the news is in fact negative news. And you may be asking yourself, well, why is there such an abundance of negative information? And the reason for this is something that's known as a negativity bias. So this is a really interesting concept. Basically, it's the idea that as human beings, we are inherently drawn to negative information. And if you look at this from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a lot of sense. So to give a good example, when we were cave people, and we were, say you're going along in the jungle and you run into a saber-toothed tiger. And by some stroke of a miracle, you happen to survive this encounter. You would want this memory to be retained in your information, so this could prevent you from having this encounter again, or allow you to be able to survive next time. Whereas if you see a sunset, that's really beautiful. It produces, feelings of pleasure and maybe makes you happy, but it doesn't do much for your survival. So another phenomenon that exists with the news is the wide amount of misinformation that exists out there. And this comes in the form of entirely falsified information, inaccurate information, or misleading information. And sometimes it actually appears, it may seem that false information travels quicker than true information. And let me just tell you what my research says about this. It has been shown that false news stories actually traverse 6 times quicker on social media. And this is due to the fact that they tunnel deeper into social networks, and they also reach a wider audience. And I think due to the catastrophic nature of a lot of fake news, as well as the sensationalized nature of them, that is kind of why we're drawn to them to that extent. So if you are somebody who is struggling in terms of checking the news and trying to moderate that behavior, one thing you might want to consider for yourself is trying to set a limit. So I would say in these days and times, maybe 2 to 3 times a day would be probably a reasonable limit. And then also think about how you're being impacted by checking the news. So how are you feeling beforehand compared to how you're feeling after? Is it raising your anxiety, raising your stress levels? Just notice that. And I think being able to do that is really helpful in terms of being able to moderate more effectively. Lastly, think about where you're getting your information from. And I think that's really important there. So I know I've offered a lot of suggestions throughout this in terms of things that are helpful in mitigating screen use. And I do want to offer mindfulness because I feel that this is paramount to everything we've been talking about. And it is one of the most effective interventions in combating addictive behavior and specifically screen use. So I know that mindfulness can sometimes get a bad rap due to the fact that people think it's not validated by science and there's no research to back it. But this is not actually true. It has been proven that mindfulness is 5 times more effective in helping people stop smoking nicotine compared to any other intervention. So I think that speaks volumes as to what a powerful tool it can be. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick little mindfulness experiment. And this is only going to take 2 minutes. And I would invite you to have your phones ready because this mindfulness activity actually involves your phones. So just take a second here and we'll start in just a second. So just find a relaxed position where you're comfortable yet still alert. Now, what I want you to do is check in with yourself and notice where your breathing is at. Just feel the gentle inhale and exhale. And wherever that's at, just notice that. Now, after you've had a moment to check in with yourself, I want you to think about your phone. What is happening to your breathing in this moment? Are you noticing any change in your body posture? Are you noticing any experience of any emotions right now? And is the quality of your attention being impacted in any way? Now I would like you to take your phone out and hold it in your hand, if you will. So don't turn it or unlock it, just hold it in your hand and see if anything's changed for you, if you're feeling anything now. Now, if you would go ahead and unlock your phone and open your text feature, don't send a text, just open it and see if anything has changed now. Now, I would encourage you to go ahead and send a text if you can. Now, please turn off your phone and put it away. And check in with yourself again. How are you feeling now? Has anything happened in terms of your breathing? So slowly you can bring your attention back to the screen and this presentation. So I'm just wondering if any of you were noticing any experience of when you're holding your phone, experience of anxiety or panic or anything, not panic, that's a strong word, but minute panic, or stress or anything like that when you were texting or holding your phone. And I think it's just important to notice. And I really think this is a good note to end on here, because it nicely encapsulates a lot of the messaging I've been trying to get across in this presentation. And I think it just is, it highlights the importance of continuing to build this awareness surrounding your use of your screen and how it's impacting you. And if you're able to think about how it's impacting you on a psychological, emotional, and physiological level, then I think that's a big step in being able to start combating your screen use, as well as addictive behavior in general. So here is a short survey, and if you wouldn't mind, we would greatly appreciate if you fill this out. And we are going to post the link in the chat here, or you can use the QR feature, whichever. And the survey is just for us to continue improving our webinars and to understand how we're doing. So now I would like to just open this up to questions from all of you. If you had any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat feature. Any burning questions whatsoever, please feel free. So I got a question pertaining to if someone needs additional help. And we will get to that in just a second here. They can feel free either to contact our department, and we're going to have that contact information in a little bit here. And we're more than happy to talk with you about whatever's going on. Or they can contact me as well, and I'll give you my contact information. And so I hope that answers the question there. One of our participants asked, do you have any research about how sleeping with our phones affects our sleep? Like, is it better to have the phones in another room? So there is a lot of information about this, and I chose not to include it in this presentation, but there's a whole bunch of research. And basically the way that works is that the blue light from your screens actually impacts your ability to sleep. So when you're exposed to that blue light, it tricks your brain into thinking it's daylight, and then that in turn can mess with your sleep cycle and lead to a host of mental health symptoms, just depression, anxiety, etc. So I would say that it probably is a better idea for you to leave your phone not in the room if you feel like you may be tempted to check it during the night. So I know for myself, I was trying to just use my alarm clock for a while and not use my phone as an alarm clock, so I wasn't as tempted to check it. Another participant here, okay. Thoughts on extended computer use for online schooling in current times? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the same things that I was talking about with regards to smartphone use also applies to computer use, but I haven't done extensive research in that area, and I feel that may be a little more specific. So I can't speak to that, but I can definitely tell you that, yeah, moderation is the key. Anything else here? Any other questions whatsoever? Okay, well, if there's no more questions, okay. Okay. So we're just going to continue here real quick. So this slide is, it just offers more about who we are, our contact information. As I stated, feel free to reach out to me if there's anything you want to talk about pertaining to this, the information you learned today, or any other addictive behavior concerns, substance use concerns, mental health in general. And I'm more than happy to talk with you. And if you want to make an appointment with myself or any of the other counselors, here's our contact information, and you can go ahead and reach us this way. So for those of you who weren't on the call or on the webinar to begin with, here is our list of upcoming webinars in the It's a Science series. So you can just take a look at this real quick. And as my colleague is putting on in the chat right now, if you want to look into any of the resources, we have all that information here, and you can access that in the chat as well. So I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us tonight. I realize there's a lot of other things you could be doing. Well, maybe not a lot considering it's a pandemic, but I do appreciate it nonetheless. And I also just want to give a big shout out to all of my collaborators who helped make this webinar possible. I really couldn't have done it without you. So thank you so much. And thank you very much for letting me present tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening.